Look at this. You're the greatest. Nobody could touch you. You're gonna memorize this. You're gonna be good. You're gonna go far, kid. All right. In this section, there are special derivatives that you can't use the power rule for. And I'm gonna list them, and I'm gonna show you some kind of patterns to how to memorize them. You must memorize them. And a lot of you are gonna say, "Okay, I'll look at them and I'll memorize them," and then you're gonna go on the test and be like, "I don't know how to do it." So you gotta memorize these. I suggest making a list and then rewriting them to memorize them. Not just looking at like flashcards or something, or just like saying, well, maybe flashcards would be really good. Get an app to do flashcards. Okay? All right. The first couple of special derivatives are the derivatives of the trig functions. There's a pattern to this. You start with sine, cosine, and tangent. That maybe, hopefully, seems natural because we've been talking about that. You usually talk about it in that order. And then secant, cosecant, and cotangent. So here we go. I'm gonna say them. I'm gonna write them down, and then you're gonna write them down too, huh? All right. The derivative of sine is just cosine of x. So that's easy. The derivative of cosine is negative sine x. Okay. The derivative of tangent is secant squared. Ooh. We could prove that one, but I'm not going to do that because I don't know the rules yet. The derivative of secant is secant tangent. The derivative of cosecant is negative cosecant cotangent. Actually, I paused it. I don't remember what I just said. Negative cosecant cotangent. And then the derivative of cotangent is negative cosecant squared. Okay, so what is the pattern here? Well, the derivative of sine being cosine, you just kind of have to remember that. The derivative of cosine is negative sine, kind of just remember that. The way I think about this is anytime my regular trig function, if I'm taking the derivative of it, anytime it starts with a co sound, I get a negative. So like here, cosecant has a negative. Cotangent has a negative. So that's how I remember that pattern. Derivative of sine is cosine. The derivative of cosine is negative sine. The derivative of tangent is secant squared. That's just something to memorize. And then the derivative of secant is secant tangent. That's also something to memorize. The derivative of cosecant is kind of like the derivative of secant. It's just cosecant cotangent instead of secant and tangent. Okay? And then cotangent is kind of like tangent. The derivative of tangent is secant squared, so the derivative of cotangent is cosecant squared. I suggest you like rewind it right now and listen to all of that again, and maybe do it a third time, so that you can start to understand the pattern. There are more, so that's the first stuff you're gonna have to memorize. I suggest writing this stuff down and then like making a quiz for yourself, and then just write those down. See if you can remember them. Let's move on. This is my favorite derivative. Nah, not really. I don't really have a favorite. So the derivative of e to the x is e to the x. It doesn't change. What does that mean? That means the slope of e to the x is actually the same as the y values for e to the x. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. And then the derivative of the natural log of x is 1 over x. Now, also something to memorize. What else? That's all for now. There'll be more later. Definitely try and memorize these. Maybe using a flashcard app would be very, very good. All right? There's probably one for the derivatives anyway. You could just like search in the App Store. But you're going to get it. You're going to spend time. You're going to memorize this. Let's move on to the examples. So here we have it. Y equals 1/3 x minus the natural log of x. So many people say ln x. I don't like it, but I mean it's not what it is. It's not ln. It's the natural log. Okay. Anyway, at what argument is x? At what argument x is the tangent to the curve horizontal? What is this saying? Admin to D. All it's saying is when did the derivative equal 0? He's right. This when is the derivative 0? Right? Remember, the derivative is the slope of the tangent line. So if the slope is 0, that means the tangent line is horizontal. All right. So let's take the derivative. Y prime then is we could use the power rule for this. Remember, Anytime you just have a coefficient in front of a regular x, it's 1, this just becomes 1/3, right? Because you bring down the 1, 1 times 1/3 is 1/3, and then you do 1 minus 1, that's x to the 0, which is just 1, so the x goes away. And then, the derivative of the natural log, well, I have to have the minus there, is just 1 over x. Okay, that's easy enough. Where does the slope equal 0? Okay, so we have the formula for the slope. We'll set it equal to 0. And then we have this. I'll add 1 over x to both sides. Well, this is easy. Then we have 1 over x equals 1/3, cross multiply, and I get x equals tres. Trace. Alright, very good. That's easy. That's easy. That's easy. Let's look at example 2 now. F of x equals secant of x. Find the derivative when x equals pi over 4. Well, first we find the derivative. F prime of x. Maybe try to do it without looking at your notes. Derivative of secant is, well, it's secant tangent. I know all these just because I've spent time to memorize them. Yeah, derivative of secant is secant tangent. So now we just plug in the pi over 4. Oh, I don't know what secant of pi over 4 is, so I'm going to change the secant into a 1 over cosine. So, and then I can plug in the pi over 4. That's not cosine. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my unit circle. Hopefully you have the unit circle memorized. It's very, very useful if you have it memorized, or you know how to build it. Pi over 4 is right here, and I know that cosine of pi over 4 is, well, that's root 2 over 2, right? Root 2 over 2 for cosine, and then that's just something I memorized. And then tangent of pi over 4 is 1. So we have 1 over root 2 divided by 2 times 1. Okay, well, root 2 over 2 in the denominator, you can flip this and multiply. So I will flip it and multiply. I need to take allergy medicine. Okay, so that's the same thing as 2 root 2. In the Khan Academy answers, they're probably going to rationalize the denominator. The denominator. And then we will get what? We'll get 2 root 2. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is just 2. So that cancels. We get the square root of 2 is our answer. That's the slope. I'm going to be done now. Maybe part 2 coming up in a moment. Actually, wait. Before we move on to part 2. Something I think is important. For all of these, that was weird. To help you memorize them, I would suggest saying them out loud. Verbally, that helps stick it in my head, so say them out loud. Yeah, that's how I memorize things. Maybe it'll help you too. Alright, now I'm done.